Hey, everybody, welcome to our weekly Bible reading check in. I'm Andrew, this is Mike, and we have the goal of reading the Bible twice in
hmm
2026, and we are getting along with it. We're into the wisdom literature, and today we're talking about Proverbs and Ecclesiastes.
Yeah, and it's been great. I love those books.
Yes, Proverbs is one of my favorites. Ecclesiastes is good too, but I've come to really love Proverbs.
hmm
And there's probably a lot of things in Proverbs that people are familiar with, sayings, little snippets that even if we didn't know they were from the Bible, we might read them in Proverbs and be shocked.
I,
Like that's what my
yeah,
grandmother used to say,
yeah.
or
I think
something
you'd,
like
you'd be
that.
surprised probably how many of those kind of sayings have filtered down in one shape or form through the centuries.
Yeah. So, what was your reaction to reading Proverbs this time? Did something hit you interesting or funny or?
Now, again, I'm listening to it, and I think we talked about this with Psalms. I don't think Proverbs is great to listen to. I think
Yeah.
it would be much better to read it, uh, like like the sayings that it is, because you just if you're when I'm listening to it, it's kind of like bam, 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 bam. You don't
Yes.
have time to dwell on anything, and I think Proverbs, maybe even more than Psalms, requires you to stop and think about the last two sentences that you read or the last little section,
Yeah.
because it is so full of those sayings. They're just That's literally what they are, wise sayings, and you have to think about them and figure out what that means for me today. They were written 3,000 years ago, roughly.
Yeah.
And so I didn't like that experience.
Yes.
But again, Proverbs are great. There's just so much there.
Well, it's hard to listen to audibly. I think it's also hard to read quickly, and
Yes.
so again, we've been making the case that you should be reading the Bible quickly. You should be reading big chunks, and we're going to stand by that. And there is value to reading Proverbs quickly. I don't want to make it seem like there's not, but this is the kind of book where you're going to want to go back and read it sometime
Right.
much slower
Right.
and give yourself time to digest and think and meditate on the wealth of wisdom here. Because certainly, if you read it quickly, you're just going to miss things.
Right. But to that point, when you read the whole thing, you see structure, and while Proverbs probably isn't structured like the typical book, we have the beginning and the father figure and the voice, and then we have the personification of wisdom and folly, and then we have all of these sayings on and on and on and on.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, let's say something about the structure of the book because there is some order to the book. When you get to all those sayings, it's not really just snippets.
they're not random.
They're not
Completely.
random. In fact, what ties them together is the source of the wisdom. So
Right.
there's a section at the beginning where it says this is the wise sayings of Solomon. And then there will be an interjection a little bit later. These are some of the wise sayings of the wise men.
Right.
Who those wise men are, we may not be entirely privy to. But then it'll come back and saying, here's some more wise sayings from Solomon that Hezekiah's guys collected. So
Mhm.
there's sort of these big chunks. At the end, we get some names of people we don't know,
Right.
like Agur and Lemuel.
Uh-huh.
So there are. It's almost like reading a collection.
It is a collection.
A best of. You know.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, it's like here's the best wisdom that Solomon had to offer us. Here's the top, top things he said. And so there is some collection in that way. There's some order in that way. But really, the most important thing, I think, is recognizing that story at the beginning. You mentioned the Father's voice.
Yes.
You mentioned the personification of wisdom and folly. It's a really great story. I don't know if you want to talk about that story at the beginning.
I mean, you go ahead, but I love the picture of, because I have children and you have children, and
Mm-hmm.
the father approaching the child and saying, I want you to succeed, I want you to do well, and so here are some things to think about, and you need to pay attention to these things. They're super important, and one of them is God. But then he branches out to what this looks like. That's why I love Proverbs. Is what does it look like out there in the real world? The terminology may be archaic because he's talking about taking cities and whatever. But then then there's wisdom, which is this woman crying out in the street, just listen to me. I have all this information. And then there's folly, who's kind of she's a prostitute,
Mm-hmm.
and she's manipulative, and she draws the what is it called, the fool, the simple,
Yeah.
right?
The naive one.
The
Yeah.
naive person, not
Yeah.
not a person who's an idiot, but just naive,
Right.
and we might say not street smart or something,
Yeah.
which is exactly what you would
Well,
say to your kids.
One translation I remember reading one time called him a simpleton.
A
And I
simpleton.
thought that was a clever way of saying it. Yeah, he
Mhm.
just, yeah.
Yeah, I love that picture and that personification. It's so easy, I think, to see once you've read the several chapters of
Yeah.
both of these.
Well, and it's a choice that the son has.
Right.
And it's the way Proverbs sets it up is it's a very this or that choice. There's not a lot of gray area in Proverbs, which is something we should probably talk a little bit about.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the initial choice is choose which woman you're gonna live with, who you're gonna have a relationship with, and so it's almost set up. The first story is almost set up. It seems to me like a father teaching his son who he should marry.
He should marry.
And that's sort of the story. But the deeper meaning is you can choose to marry wisdom and have all these kind of blessings, all this good stuff, or you can choose to marry folly. And you can have a lot of fun, but it's going to end in disaster and death and all kinds of financial ruin and all this kind of stuff. So it's this simple choice. You be wise, you be foolish. And that's why so often in the Proverbs themselves, when we get to chapter 10 and you get all these short snippets, it's often 2 lines.
Right.
And one is often the wise thing and the other is contrasted with the foolish thing. So you
Right.
get that dichotomy, that separation of this or that throughout the book.
Which is, we might step back and go, well, it doesn't always work that way, which is true. That life isn't that predictable. But kind of the idea here is there is a pattern, and if you understand wisdom, you will recognize it's just simple stuff like hard work is good, being lazy is bad.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that everyone that works hard is going to be super rich or successful, and it doesn't mean that everyone who's lazy might not somehow strike it rich.
Yeah.
But we know those are edge cases, that generally speaking, hard work is good and laziness is bad. And so it's full of all that kind of, again, we might just call it folk wisdom, but it's absolutely true.
Yeah. Yeah. I use the word general truths or general wisdom or something along those lines. And I think that's the way to look at Proverbs is these are things that more often than not are going to prove right. And I've heard people, I've talked to people who look at certain proverbs and say, well, I did that and this didn't happen. And so it's important that we recognize we don't want to stretch proverbs beyond their intended purpose.
Right.
In some ways, though, this proverb sort of gives us the balance to Job in a lot of ways, because Job, you'll remember, was all about I'm doing everything right and nothing good is happening to me.
Right.
And Proverbs is sort of the opposite of that extreme, where it's if you do everything right, only good will happen to you. And so you kind of get both ends of that emotional spectrum. And maybe there ought to be a book that helps us balance that.
Maybe the next one.
Maybe
kinda
Ecclesiastes
helps.
will do that a little bit.
Help. But think about it. I think all of us could recognize if we could only make the best decision every time,
Yeah.
how much less trouble would we have in our lives? Granted, there would still be external things, but I mean, look, how much trouble have we all brought upon ourselves by making foolish choices, the foolish choice rather than the wise choice. So Proverbs says, this is what happens when you make the wise one. This is what happens when you make the foolish one. And again, I love that picture of marrying one or marrying the other. I think people have had that experience, and it does never end well.
Yeah.
So if we could eliminate that, which I think is the idea at the beginning, the king is talking to his child, don't make these mistakes. We do that with our children. I mean, I hope everyone does. That's what I did and still do. Mine are grown up. And but yet I'm still prone to making some of those mistakes too. So Proverbs 1 I go back to a lot just because it's so great. I want to learn how to deal with people, handle relationships, be recognized, whatever it is, it's in there.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the more memorable passages in Proverbs is probably the very last one.
Yep.
You get to the end of the book and there's this poem. It kind of stands alone in a lot of ways. In fact, if you're reading it in Hebrew, it stands all by itself because it's call it an acrostic poem. Each line begins with the next letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Doesn't come across in English very well, but that's the case in Hebrew. This excellent wife who can find That's how it ends, is with this picture of a woman. And I'll just say, I think what's fascinating about that to me is it ends the same place it began.
Mhm.
It began with this choice that the son had to make. Which woman are you going to live with? I don't think he's talking about literal women at the beginning of the story. He's talking about wisdom. You need to
Right.
choose to live life
Right.
with wisdom. And I think you come down to the end of the book, and what I think he's doing there is he's showing us this is what life can look like
Yes.
if you choose to live with woman wisdom. And if you just read through that poem, of course, she's praised for a lot of things, but the things she's praised for is what she brings to the person who chooses her, which I think says a lot about that son at the beginning of the story.
So a lot of women look at this passage as, this is what I have to be.
Mm.
And there's certainly an element to that, right? Like, yes, this is how we should be. There's a lot of passages we read, like, we should all be
Yeah.
and act this way or the other
Yeah.
as we have those opportunities. But I don't think that should be read as if you're not all that, you're suddenly some kind of terrible wife or
Yeah, I don't think so. And this is, this passage at the end here is not only a list of qualities that women should aspire to, it's also a lot of qualities that men should aspire
Yes.
to.
Yes, that gets
And-
overlooked.
And so it's not the kind of thing where I don't think we should look at this as like, this is the checklist. Like, this is the wife I'm looking for, right? It starts off with the question, who can find her? That's a rhetorical question. And the answer to that question is, she doesn't exist.
Nobody.
Because she is wisdom.
Right.
This is what wisdom is. So yeah, I think maybe we've done some damage in terms of the expectation we place on women or on people based on this verse. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't have high expectations. I'm not saying we shouldn't have high expectations for our wives or our brides
Right.
or ourselves. But I think when you read this in the context of the book, it becomes a powerful picture of what wisdom is.
Absolutely. I think anyone who is married, has been married, has seen marriages, can appreciate if you marry a wise person. If you're male or female, you marry a wise person, things are gonna go better.
Mm-hmm.
If you spend time around wise people, your life's going to go better, right? All those kind of things are wrapped up in this book. That's the idea. So, there's a lot of don't listen to fools, don't get involved with people who are making evil plans because it's going to be a snare. There's a lot of that kind of talk, snares and success or things dying and things thriving. It's, again, as you said earlier, it's a very either or, but it's trying to illustrate the picture that this is what wisdom creates.
Yeah.
And ultimately that wisdom came from God.
Yeah.
And I love the image of she's on the street corner saying, here's the answer. I've got it.
Yes.
I've got it. And yet sometimes we still pass right on by and we look at the other lady instead.
Yeah. Yep. Proverbs is such a great book. I love it. But we should say something about Ecclesiastes too.
Let's do.
Because
Ecclesiastes
we've all read
is great.
Ecclesiastes, and there's a tone difference. Jumping from Proverbs to Ecclesiastes, Proverbs is fairly matter of fact. It's just sort of, this is the way it is, and that's good.
Sort of about order, clarity, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Ecclesiastes is kind of a downer. I mean, it opens with the catchword in Ecclesiastes is vanity, right?
Vanity.
Which is just the idea of like emptiness, or maybe something that just doesn't last a substantial amount of time. And basically, the book of Ecclesiastes just says that's how I'm going to summarize life. It's all just worthless.
I think we need to this is where context matters.
Yeah.
He's not saying life is worthless or useless, but I was going to look it up because I was listening to it out of the and why is my Bible not flipping over? I was listening to it out of the Christian Standard, and it doesn't use the word vanity, and I found that jarring as I was listening to it. I think it used the word futility, or futile, which it means the same thing, but vanity is such a great word because of this. But so there's a cue, life under the sun, right? Is throughout this book, and he does come to the end about fear God and keep his commandments, and this is man's all. And there's a lot of eat, drink, and be merry, and enjoy the sort of fruits of your labor. But I think the overarching theme is like, listen, the world is broken and bad. So this goes the opposite way. Bad things happen to good people. Good things happen to bad people. what does he say? Sometimes the race isn't always to the swift, and so on.
Time and
And
chance.
that time and chance, and that's how we all know that's how the world works.
Yeah.
And so he just, I think we were talking about this before. To me, it feels like a science experiment where he says this at the beginning. Like I have all this money and wisdom, and I want to try everything and see what it's about. And then he goes and he outlines what he tried, and it pretty much was everything. He built stuff, women, wine, study, even madness and folly and laughter. Like he looked at everything, and he said, it all doesn't really make any difference.
Yeah. By the way, this is traditionally understood to be a work of Solomon. There's some question whether it's written by him or in his, as if by him, or that's a debate for another time. But it's clear that it's from his perspective.
Right.
And you think about Solomon as being, of course, this figure of great wisdom in the Bible, but also this figure of immense wealth. He has not only the wisdom to test everything, but he's got the resources to do it. And he's running this huge experiment. Right. How can I be happy? What will make me satisfied in life?
And he was king for 40 years, so we had plenty of time.
Yeah.
To see all this come to fruition.
Yeah. I think one of you already mentioned the under the sun phrase that happens a lot. It seems to me that one of the things he's doing in this book is explaining how vain or futile or useless things are if all you have is what's under the sun.
Right. And that's the message, right?
And so there's maybe two ways to look at the world. You can look at it just as this is it. This is all you get. In which case, yeah, go enjoy it, live it up. That's fine. But as soon as you acknowledge that there's something above the sun, as soon as you acknowledge there's a God and a creator and those kinds of things, then there's much more meaning in what happens here. And so I think that under the sun phrase is really helpful for me to remember, like, okay, he's trying to find happiness without God.
Right. And
what he ultimately finds out is you can't have it.
Yeah. So he'll argue, much like Proverbs, like doing good is better than doing bad, and that kind of stuff. But he said you're going to see it everywhere you look, and he does mention that it is part of our reward is to enjoy the things that we've worked for, that we've done, right? Like I think we can see that even though the world's broken, we can still find pleasure and happiness in there. But again, if you totally remove God, then what good is it? So once you add God, we know there's more, as you said. So he's not explicitly going there, but yeah, just listen. If he wrote, if it is Solomon, I think it is too. He wrote all these proverbs, or many of the proverbs, and then he wrote this. Like it's totally. I feel like this came at the end of his life. Okay, I've been working on this project for my whole life, and here's what I did, and here's what I figured out. In the meantime, he's writing all these proverbs, and he's got a psalm and some other things, right? And running a kingdom, a very, 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 very successful kingdom. Yeah. But in the end, he can say, it all ended up being not really useful.
Yeah. If you read Solomon's story in Kings or Chronicles, it kind of ends on a sour note, and you don't. We have such great hopes for Solomon,
right?
And at the end of his life, he's married 300 wives, he's got 700 concubines. He's basically become a new sort of pharaoh to the people of Israel. He's enslaved them to build his palace and his temple and all this kind of stuff. I've heard people look at this book and try to read it as if this is Solomon repenting later in life. And I don't know if that's appropriate or not. But in some ways, it does read as if this is somebody who's at the end of his life just saying, I tried it. I tried everything I could to be happy. And, I think maybe there's some consolation for some that this is Solomon's repentance.
Maybe. But I think we need to look at it and remember he is extraordinarily wise. Like he's literally doing this through this lens of wisdom. He's not just, I want to live it up and be that guy.
Yeah.
Though he did. But he actually has a plan, and he's actually again viewing all of this through this wise lens, which God gave him. He asked for it, God gave it to him. And so this isn't just a rich guy living it up and then sort of having regrets at the end. I really think this is a lifelong intent sort of experiment to test all these limits. Like he went into it to do that because he was so wise, where you and I maybe would just enjoy the the sort of lifestyle or whatever that brought.
Yeah. So he goes through this whole experiment, and then he comes down to the end, and the grand conclusion to the experiment is, you better serve God.
Right. Otherwise, what are you doing?
Everything's useless if you don't serve God.
Yeah.
Anything else in Ecclesiastes we want to talk about?
Chapter 3 gets read at every funeral under the sun. Right?
Yeah.
Time to die, and time to live, time to kill, all that stuff.
And was once a popular song by the Byrds.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. Very good.
Look at that. I bet people didn't know I could come up with that reference.
I'm surprised. They're way before your time. No, that's a classic, you know, but I think Ecclesiastes probably doesn't get read enough. I love listening to it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Just it is not at all written like those other two books. So
Ecclesiastes is different than Proverbs.
I love sort of hearing the sort of progression of him going through, and it's one story really.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did this, and this is what I found out, and I'm just like fascinated by that. I like this book a lot. Anyway, I enjoyed teaching it the last time I got to teach through it. So I don't think we give it enough attention.
Sure.
Because it is kind of like, well, I don't know, how does that apply to me? I'm trying to follow God, and there's not a whole lot in there about that except to tell us to follow God.
Yeah. Well, Ecclesiastes, I think you're right. We don't give it enough attention, probably because it's a smaller book in the Old Testament. We got bigger books we got to study, right? And we do that sometimes with New Testament books as well. The smaller books we just sort of don't think about as much. That's going to be true of Song of Solomon as well, which is one we're going to be reading next week. I think we've got Song of Solomon set to go.
It's like one day on Song of Solomon, and then we start Isaiah. But Isaiah is so big, it's
going to cover a couple weeks.
Yeah, so I think what we're going to do is mostly talk about Song of Solomon, Song of Songs, the Canticles. There's a lot of names for it.
A lot of names.
And then we'll maybe introduce Isaiah, but then we'll save Isaiah discussion for later. We're getting into some really big books, so there's going to be a lot of, I think, where we're going to focus on one maybe of the things we're reading. Yeah, so we will try. I will obviously keep up with the readings and stay on schedule with you, but we might not discuss the reading you just read. We might, save that for a week. So it'll be a week or two. So anyway, we'll leave our discussion there. Hope you enjoy reading the Song of Songs and Isaiah, first part of it. And thank you for joining us. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. We want you to be involved, share it with your friends, all that good stuff. Make comments if you have questions down there. Absolutely. We want to hear from you, and we hope that it's been an encouragement to you. Thank you, and we'll talk to you later.